In the rugged terrain of Arizona Territory, 1885, a lone figure appeared on the horizon. Clara Bennett froze at the sight, her heart recognizing what her mind refused to believe. Thomas Alpha Apache, once the most feared frontier lawman west of the Mississippi, dismounted his stallion with the same powerful grace she remembered. 12 years had etched new lines around his eyes, but they still held that piercing gaze that could strip away pretense with a single look. The small trading post fell silent as he approached, townsfolk whispering his legend behind cupped hands. He stopped before her, weathered hat clutched against his chest, vulnerability replacing his legendary steel. Could she trust him with her heart after all these years? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun filtered through the calico curtains of Bennett's trading post as Clara meticulously arranged a new shipment of tinned goods. 12 years had transformed the heartbroken girl into a shrewd businesswoman, her once soft hands now calloused from honest work. The deed to the establishment lay framed behind the counter, a testament to her resilience after Thomas disappeared. "Miss Bennett, the Miller family's wagon just pulled up. Looks like they're ready to stock up before heading to Tucson," Sarah called from the doorway, her graying hair tucked neatly beneath a modest bonnet. At 45, Sarah had become Clara's right hand, confidant, and the closest thing to family she had left. "Tell them I'll be right out," Clara replied, straightening her simple blue dress. She paused briefly at the small mirror hanging beside the storeroom door, assessing the woman she had become. At 36, fine lines had begun to frame her eyes, evidence of squinting into the Arizona sun and the weight of running a business. Alone in a territory that respected men's ambitions more than women's determination, the trading post had started as a desperate gamble. When Thomas never returned, Clara had used her savings to purchase this humble building from a discouraged settler heading back east. The first 2 years had been a constant struggle against bankruptcy, prejudice and loneliness so acute it physically ached. But slowly, steadily, she had built something remarkable, an establishment respected by settlers, Native Americans, and Mexican traders alike. Mrs. Miller says her youngest has grown another 3 inches since winter, Sarah mentioned as Clara emerged into the main room. "Likely needs new clothes again." Clara nodded, pushing thoughts of Thomas firmly aside, as she had trained herself to do. "We received those bolts of sturdy cotton last week. Should be perfect for growing boys." The Trading Post's ledger told the story of Clara's transformation better than words could. The careful columns of numbers, the growing list of inventory, the steady increase in profits, all meticulously recorded in her precise handwriting. She had learned to calculate margins, negotiate with suppliers, and extend credit to trustworthy customers. The Territorial Bank had been skeptical when she first approached them, but now the manager tipped his hat respectfully when she walked past. Miss Bennett, James Miller greeted her warmly as she stepped onto the covered porch. "Mighty fine day, isn't it? Heard tell there's a railroad man in town. Blackwood's his name. Been talking about progress and prosperity." He scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Might be good for business, I reckon." Clara's smile remained fixed, though her eyes hardened slightly. "Perhaps. Though I've found that men promising prosperity often mean their own, Mr. Miller, not necessarily ours." The conversation shifted to the Millers' needs as Clara efficiently assembled their supplies. Young David Miller, no more than 10, stared at her with undisguised curiosity. "Miss Bennett, is it true you can shoot as good as any man?" "Better than most," Sarah interjected with a proud smile. "Saw her take down a rattler at 20 paces last summer. Clean shot right through the head." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Now, Sarah, let's not exaggerate. Self-sufficiency is simply a necessity out here." But the boy's admiring gaze warmed something long dormant in her heart. Later, after the Millers departed and the afternoon lull settled over the trading post, Clara found herself pulling out the worn deed from its frame. Her fingertips traced over the official seal and her own name written in formal script. Clara Elizabeth Bennett, sole proprietor. How desperately she had clung to this document in those early days. Proof that she belonged somewhere, owned something. When Thomas's absence had left her feeling adrift in the world, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention back to the present. Tucking the deed carefully into its place, Clara straightened her shoulders and prepared to face whatever new challenge might be riding toward her establishment. The woman she had become did not cower or retreat, no matter who approached. Even if yesterday's ghost had suddenly materialized in the form of Thomas Alpha Apache after 12 long, silent years, Thomas Alpha Apache rested his weathered frame against the railing of the town's modest hotel, watching Bennett's trading post from across the dusty main street. His fingers absently traced the outline of the badge in his pocket, a tarnished 5-pointed star he'd carried for too many years. He never wore it anymore, hadn't for some time, but couldn't bring himself to discard it entirely. "Figured I'd find you lurking about," a gruff voice called from behind. "Still got that Apache stealth, I see." Thomas turned slowly, recognizing the voice, before his eyes confirmed the speaker. "Jackson." "Heard you made Deputy Marshal." Deputy Marshal Everett Jackson approached with the deliberate swagger of authority, though his eyes held genuine surprise at seeing his former partner. At 52, Jackson's once black hair had gone mostly gray, but his formidable presence remained unchanged. "Acting Marshal, actually." Jackson tapped the gleaming badge on his chest. "Unlike some, I stayed the course. 12 years without a word, Apache. Folks thought you were dead. Some days I nearly was." Thomas's voice remained level, but his dark eyes reflected memories best left unspoken. Jackson studied him, professional assessment mixing with old camaraderie. "Town's changed." "She's changed too." He nodded toward the trading post. "Built herself quite the operation after you vanished." Thomas's jaw tightened. "I never meant to stay away so long. Intentions don't count for much out here. Actions do." Jackson lowered his voice. "Why come back now?" "Clara's finally put the past behind her." Thomas pulled the tarnished badge from his pocket, holding it between them. "Some debts can't be settled without returning to where they began." The badge caught the sunlight, revealing a dent near its center, evidence of the bullet it had once stopped. Thomas had been 31 when he'd earned it, the first half Apache to wear the star in the territory. His mother had been a healer from the White Mountain Apache tribe, his father a cavalry officer who'd chosen love over prejudice. Both had died when Thomas was 15, leaving him to navigate between two worlds that rarely welcomed those of mixed blood. "You were the best tracker we ever had," Jackson admitted grudgingly. "Even the full-bloods respected your skills. That's why they called you Alpha, first among hunters." Thomas smiled faintly. "The name was meant as an insult at first, white officers thinking they were clever, till they needed someone to track Hollister's gang through the Superstition Mountains." Jackson's gaze sharpened. "Is that why you're back? Heard rumors Hollister survived Sonora." Thomas slipped the badge back into his pocket. "I'm here for Clara first. Everything else comes after. She won't make it easy on you," Jackson warned. "And neither will I if you hurt her again." Thomas's expression remained impassive, though something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "I never meant to hurt her the first time, yet you left without a word, to protect her." Thomas's voice carried the weight of years. "Hollister swore he'd kill her if I didn't come alone. When his men ambushed me at the border, I knew she'd be safer if everyone believed I was dead." Jackson's skepticism was evident. "And the 12 years since?" Thomas turned back toward the trading post, his shoulders bearing an invisible burden. 5 years in a Sonoran prison, 3 recovering with the mountain tribe, who found me half dead after my escape. The rest tracking Hollister's operation north. I sent letters once I could. They never reached her." "Convenient story," Jackson remarked, though doubt had crept into his tone. "Truth rarely concerns itself with convenience." Thomas straightened, standing several inches taller than the deputy. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Jackson. Just a chance to make things right." Jackson considered this, then gestured toward the town. Town council meets tonight at 7. Blackwood's presenting his railroad plans. Might interest you, seeing as the proposed line cuts right through Clara's property. He paused meaningfully. Blackwood's security detail arrived yesterday. One of them looks remarkably like a man who should be serving 3 life sentences in Yuma prison. Thomas's expression darkened as Jackson walked away. He reached again for the tarnished badge, a reminder of the oath he'd taken and the cost of honoring it. The man he was, lawman, tracker, lover, had fractured the day he rode away from Clara. Now he had to discover what remained of each, and whether any piece could still serve the purpose he'd returned to fulfill. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Bennett's trading post as Clara finished tallying the day's receipts. The bell above the door chimed softly, and she looked up to find Thomas standing in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the fading light. "We're closing shortly," she said, her tone professionally detached despite the thundering in her chest. Thomas removed his hat, revealing the silver streaks now running through his black hair. "I was hoping we might talk." Clara set down her pencil with deliberate care. 12 years of silence, and now you want to talk." She smoothed her apron, buying time to compose herself. "Well, you found your voice at an inconvenient time. I have inventory to complete." Sarah emerged from the storeroom, stopping abruptly at the sight of Thomas. Her eyes darted between them before Clara gave her a slight nod. "I'll finish up in the back," Sarah offered, retreating with unusual haste. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Thomas finally broke it. "You've done well for yourself. The whole territory talks about Bennett's trading post." "I had little choice in the matter," Clara replied. "When you disappeared, I had to make my own way." Thomas stepped further into the store, his movements measured as if approaching a skittish horse. "Clara, there are things you don't know about why I left." "I'm certain there are," she said, closing the ledger with finality. "Though I'm less certain why I should care to hear them now." The hardness in her voice made him wince, but he pressed on. "I never intended to stay away so long." "Yet you did." Clara finally looked directly at him, her green eyes clear and unflinching. "Intentions mean very little against 12 years of reality, Thomas." He nodded slowly. "I deserve that." "I deserve worse," Clara sighed, suddenly feeling the weight of the day, of all the days since he'd left. "What do you want from me?" "A chance to explain," he answered simply. "And a room if you still rent them." Clara's eyebrows rose. "You want to stay here?" "At my boarding house, if you'll allow it." His gaze was steady. "I can pay, and I won't trouble you beyond what you're willing to hear." Clara laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "The famous Alpha Apache, reduced to requesting lodging from me. How times have changed." "They have," he agreed, no trace of resentment in his voice. "You've grown stronger. I've grown humbler." Something in his quiet acceptance punctured her practiced indifference. Clara glanced toward the connecting door that led to the modest boarding house she'd added 5 years ago. "Room 3 is available. $5 a week, meals not included." She pulled a key from beneath the counter. "Quiet hours begin at 9. Any disturbances and you're out. No refund." Their fingers didn't touch as she placed the key on the counter between them. Thomas nodded his thanks, placing the exact amount beside it. "The town's changed," he observed, glancing out the window. "More buildings, more people. Progress happens, with or without us." Clara began arranging items on a nearby shelf, needing something to occupy her hands. "The railroad's coming, or so they say." Thomas's expression sharpened. "Blackwood's railroad?" Clara paused, surprised. "You know of Edmund Blackwood?" "I've heard stories." His tone carried a warning. "None of them good." Clara studied him. "You've been back one day, and already you're concerning yourself with local matters." Thomas met her gaze evenly. "I'm concerning myself with matters that affect you." The directness of his statement left her momentarily speechless. Sarah returned, breaking the tension with her practical presence. "I prepared room 3, she announced, having obviously overheard their conversation. "Clean sheets and fresh water." Thomas tipped his hat to both women. "Thank you kindly." He collected the key, then hesitated. "Clara, I know words mean little after so long, but I am sorry." After he departed, Sarah gave Clara a questioning look. "Are you certain about this?" "No," Clara admitted, "but I've survived worse than having Thomas Apache under my roof." Later that night, alone in her quarters, Clara removed a leather-bound journal from beneath a loose floorboard beside her bed. Inside were 12 years of unsent letters, angry at first, then questioning, finally reflective. Words she'd written to a ghost, never expecting him to return and potentially read them. She ran her fingers over the most recent entry, dated just last month. "I finally stopped looking for you in the face of every stranger who passes through town. I suppose that's what healing looks like after all this time." Clara closed the journal and returned it to its hiding place. Thomas could have the room, but these words, these remained hers alone. The town hall was uncommonly crowded for a Tuesday evening. Clara slipped into a seat near the back, nodding politely to familiar faces while avoiding the curious glances directed her way. News of Thomas's return had spread through town with predictable speed. At the front of the room, a large survey map was prominently displayed on an easel. Edmund Blackwood stood beside it, immaculately dressed in an Eastern suit that seemed impervious to the Arizona dust. At 58, with silver hair and patrician features, he cut an impressive figure that commanded attention without raising his voice. "Progress, my friends," Blackwood addressed the gathered townsfolk, "is the lifeblood of this great nation. The Transcontinental Railroad has already transformed the East. Now the Southwest deserves the same opportunity." Clara studied the man carefully. Behind his benevolent smile lay the calculated assessment of a predator. His manicured finger traced a bold red line across the survey map. "The proposed route will connect you directly to markets in California and Texas," Blackwood continued. "Property values will triple. Merchants will prosper. This dusty outpost will become a thriving hub of commerce." Mayor Atkins nodded enthusiastically beside him. "Mr. Blackwood's investment represents tremendous opportunity for our community." Clara's attention was drawn to a movement at the door. Thomas slipped inside, positioning himself against the back wall. Their eyes met briefly before she returned her focus to the proceedings. "Now, securing the necessary land rights is our immediate concern," Blackwood explained. "My company is prepared to make generous offers to all affected property owners." His gaze swept the room, lingering momentarily on Clara. "Naturally, we hope to avoid any unnecessary delays." Judge Wilson, the oldest resident and most respected voice in town, raised his hand. "What happens if landowners decline to sell, Mr. Blackwood?" A flicker of something cold crossed Blackwood's face before his smile returned. "The territorial legislature has granted certain allowances for projects of public benefit. However, I prefer voluntary arrangements. They're so much more neighborly." Clara felt the weight of stairs. Her property sat at the narrowest passage between the hills, precisely where the red line crossed the map. As the meeting concluded, Blackwood approached her directly. "Miss Bennett, I've heard remarkable things about your establishment. Perhaps we could discuss your property over dinner tomorrow." "My property isn't for sale, Mr. Blackwood," Clara replied evenly. His smile didn't falter. "Everything has its price, Miss Bennett. It's simply a matter of discovering the correct figure." He glanced meaningfully around the room. "Progress is inevitable. One can either profit from it or be crushed beneath its wheels." After Blackwood departed, Clara found herself surrounded by concerned neighbors. "You ought to consider his offer," Mrs. Peterson advised anxiously. "My Harold says these railroad men don't take kindly to refusal." "The Wilcox family sold yesterday," Mr. Green added. "Got twice what their land was worth." Clara extricated herself from the well-meaning crowd and stepped into the cool evening air. Thomas was waiting outside, his face unreadable in the lamplight. "That man is trouble," he said without preamble. "So everyone keeps telling me," Clara replied. "Yet I notice the same concerned citizens are quick to take his money." Thomas fell into step beside her as she walked toward her trading post. "Blackwood's reputation extends beyond this territory. 3 towns north of here, a widow who refused to sell had her property mysteriously burned down. Clara glanced at him. Are you suggesting he's responsible? I'm suggesting men like Blackwood rarely achieve their ambitions through honest means. Thomas's voice was low. His security men aren't ordinary hired hands. They're gunmen with histories. They reached the trading post in silence, under the porch light. Clara finally asked the question that had been troubling her since the meeting. Why do you care what happens to my property, Thomas? He met her gaze directly. Because I still care what happens to you. Clara shook her head. You lost that right 12 years ago. Perhaps, he conceded. But that doesn't change how I feel. Before she could respond, hoofbeats approached. Deputy Jackson rode up, his expression grim. Trouble at the saloon, he announced. 2 of Blackwood's men are threatening old Sam for speaking against the railroad. Thought you should know. His eyes shifted to Thomas. Figured you might want to see what you're up against. After Jackson rode away, Clara's hand instinctively reached for Thomas's arm. She withdrew it quickly, but not before he noticed. I should see to this, Thomas said. It's not your concern, Clara replied, though her voice lacked conviction. Thomas's eyes softened. I'll stay out of it if you ask me to. Clara hesitated, then sighed. Just be careful. Blackwood seems like a man who collects grudges. As Thomas walked away, Clara noticed a corner of paper protruding from his pocket, a folded section of the survey map, torn away when no one was looking, the same section that showed her trading post at the center of Blackwood's plans. Clara couldn't sleep. The grandfather clock in the hallway had just struck midnight when she heard footsteps on the porch. She reached for the shotgun propped beside her bed, then relaxed when she recognized Thomas's silhouette through the curtains. He sat on the steps, still as stone, watching the empty street. Against her better judgment, Clara wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside. Thomas didn't turn, though she knew he was aware of her presence. Saloon trouble resolved, she asked, keeping her distance. For now. He shifted slightly, making room on the step. Blackwood's men backed down when Jackson arrived. Clara hesitated, then sat beside him, careful to maintain space between them. The night air carried the scent of sage and distant rain. Why did you really come back, Thomas? The question emerged softer than she'd intended. He stared at the distant mountains, silver under moonlight. Would you believe me if I told you I never wanted to leave? I might have 12 years ago. Thomas reached slowly into his shirt pocket and withdrew a worn leather wallet. From it, he carefully extracted a faded photograph, their only picture together, taken by a traveling photographer just days before he disappeared. In it, a younger Clara smiled broadly, while Thomas stood stoic beside her, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. I've carried this every day, he said simply. Clara's breath caught. She remembered that day clearly. The itinerant photographer charging an exorbitant fee, Thomas reluctantly agreeing because she'd wanted a memento so badly. May I? She asked. He placed it gently in her palm. The edges were worn smooth from handling. The image faded, but still clear enough to transport her back to that moment, a time when possibilities stretched before them like an open road. We were so young, she murmured. You were 24, Thomas recalled. I was 33, already chasing outlaws for nearly a decade. Clara traced the outline of their figures with her fingertip. What happened, Thomas? The truth this time. He took a deep breath. I was tracking James Hollister. He'd murdered 3 families along the border, including a judge who'd sentenced his brother. Thomas's voice tightened. The night before I left, I received intelligence about his location. But it was a trap. You could have told me. Hollister had threatened you specifically. Thomas finally turned to face her. He'd learned of our relationship, left a note promising he'd make you suffer if I didn't come alone. I believed I was protecting you by keeping you ignorant. Clara's fingers tightened around the photograph. And after? 12 years is a long time to be chasing one man. I never got the chance to chase him. Moonlight highlighted the scar running along Thomas's jawline, a mark she didn't recognize. His men ambushed me at the border. I took 2 bullets before they left me for dead in the desert. Clara's composure wavered. But you survived, barely. A Mexican patrol found me, but instead of medical attention, I received a cell in Sonora prison. His eyes darkened with memory. They claimed I was responsible for the massacre of a village. Hollister's work, but with evidence planted to implicate me. 5 years, Clara whispered, recalling his conversation with Jackson. Thomas nodded. 5 years in a hole so deep my own government couldn't find me, or didn't try. Bitterness edged his voice. I escaped during a prison riot, but barely survived the desert crossing. A mountain tribe took me in, nursed me back from the edge of death, and the years after. Tracking Hollister, learning he'd built connections with powerful men like Blackwood. Thomas's gaze returned to the street. I sent letters once I could. They never reached you. Clara wanted to disbelieve him, to preserve the anger that had sustained her for so long. But the evidence of his hardship was etched in new lines on his face, in scars she didn't recognize. Why didn't you send word through official channels? The marshal's office could have. I tried. Thomas's voice was weary. Later I discovered Hollister had friends in the territorial offices. My communications were intercepted. Clara returned the photograph to him. Their fingers brushed, a momentary connection that sent warmth. Through her, despite her resolve, I can't simply forget 12 years of believing you abandoned me, she said finally. I don't expect you to. Thomas carefully returned the photograph to his wallet. But I need you to understand that Hollister is dangerous, and if he's working with Blackwood, your refusal to sell puts you directly in his path. Clara stood, wrapping her shawl tighter. I've faced dangerous men before. I'm not that same girl in the photograph, Thomas. As she turned to go, he spoke again, his voice barely audible. Neither am I that same man, Clara, but I still remember the promise I made to you. Clara paused at the door. Which promise was that? That I would come back for you. Thomas remained seated, his profile outlined against the night sky. No matter how long it took, the trading post hummed with unusual activity as Clara helped Mrs. Wilson select fabric for her grandchildren's school clothes. The older woman's chatter provided welcome distraction from thoughts of last night's conversation with Thomas. I told Judge Wilson we should consider Blackwood's offer, Mrs. Wilson confided, examining a bolt of calico. At our age, who needs the trouble? But the old goat refuses to be intimidated by city money, as he puts it. Clara smiled diplomatically. The judge has always valued principle. Principle won't protect our property if Mrs. Wilson stopped abruptly, her gaze fixed on the doorway. 2 men Clara didn't recognize entered the trading post. Their clothes marked them as newcomers, but the way they carried themselves, alert, hands never far from their holstered pistols, identified them immediately as Blackwood's men. Afternoon. Ladies, the taller one drawled, removing his hat with exaggerated courtesy. Fine establishment you got here, Miss Bennett. Clara nodded coolly. Thank you. Is there something specific you're looking for today? The second man wandered the store, idly handling merchandise. Just getting acquainted with local businesses. Mr. Blackwood likes us to be familiar with the community. I've completed my purchases, Mrs. Wilson announced, gathering her items hastily. Bill it to the judge's account, Clara, dear. After the older woman hurried out, Clara moved behind the counter, positioning herself near the shotgun hidden below. If you're not buying anything, gentlemen, I'll have to ask you to leave. I have inventory to complete. The men exchanged amused glances. Inventory might be a waste of time, the taller one suggested. Considering this building's coming down soon to make way for progress, his companion picked up a delicate porcelain figurine. Shame if anything got broken before then. He deliberately loosened his grip, letting the piece dangle precariously from his fingers. The bell above the door chimed as Thomas entered. He assessed the situation with a single sweep of his eyes. Problem here, Clara? His voice was calm, but his stance had shifted imperceptibly. The taller man turned. No problem. Just explaining some business realities to the lady. She's an intelligent businesswoman, Thomas replied. I'm sure she understands reality just fine without your help. The man with the figurine set it down with exaggerated care. Well, look who's back from the dead. The famous Alpha Apache. Heard you lost your teeth in a Mexican prison. Thomas smiled thinly. Heard wrong. Tension crackled in the air as the men sized each other up. Clara gripped the edge of the counter, recognizing the dangerous stillness in Thomas's posture. Mr. Blackwood won't appreciate interference, the taller man warned, and I don't appreciate threats to this establishment, Thomas countered. Miss Bennet has declined your employer's offer. Professional courtesy suggests you respect that decision. The second man moved slightly, his hand dropping toward his holster. In a blur of motion that belied his age, Thomas closed the distance between them. Nobody saw exactly what happened, but suddenly the man was gasping, bent double. His gun hand immobilized in Thomas's grip. I wouldn't, Thomas advised the taller man, who had reached for his own weapon. Your friend here might lose the use of his trigger finger. The door burst open again as Sarah returned with supplies. She froze, taking in the tableau. Sarah, Clara said evenly, please fetch Deputy Jackson. No need to involve the law. The taller man backpedaled, raising his hands. We were just leaving. He nodded to his companion, whom Thomas released with a subtle shove. As they departed, the second man turned back. This isn't over, Apache. After they'd gone, Clara exhaled shakily. That was foolish, Thomas. There are proper channels. Men like that only understand one language, Thomas interrupted. And it isn't proper paperwork. Sarah bustled around, straightening merchandise. They've been in town 3 days and already caused trouble at the saloon, threatened old Sam, and now this. Thomas moved to the window, watching the men cross the street. It'll escalate. Blackwood's testing boundaries. I can handle my own affairs, Clara insisted. Thomas turned to her, his expression grave. Not against men like that. Not alone. Before Clara could respond, the door opened again. A tall Apache man entered, his dignified bearing commanding immediate attention despite his simple attire. His weathered face broke into a smile at the sight of Thomas. Brother, he greeted in accented English. The spirits said you would return. Thomas clasped the man's forearm in a gesture of deep respect. Running Wolf, it's been too long. Clara recognized the visitor, a respected medicine man from the nearby reservation who occasionally traded at her post. You know each other? She asked. Running Wolf's people sheltered me after my escape, Thomas explained. He reached for a rifle that hung on the wall behind the counter, an old cavalry Springfield with Apache symbols carefully etched into its wooden stock. My father's rifle. You kept it, Clara nodded. I couldn't bring myself to sell it. Thomas ran his fingers reverently over the symbols. Protection, strength, wisdom. My mother's father carved these when my parents married. Running Wolf's expression grew serious. I bring warning, brother. Bad men ask questions at the reservation. About you. About the woman? He nodded respectfully toward Clara. Thomas's jaw tightened. Hollister. The one with snake eyes. Yes. Running Wolf placed a small leather pouch on the counter. Medicine for protection. For both of you. Clara looked between the two men. I don't understand. Why would this Hollister care about me? Thomas exchanged glances with Running Wolf before answering. Because Hollister doesn't just want revenge against me. He wants everything I ever cared about destroyed. The weight of his words hung in the air as Clara finally accepted a truth she'd been resisting since Thomas's return. Whatever storm was coming, they would face it together, willing or not. The lamp in Clara's private sitting room cast warm light against the gathering darkness outside. Thomas stood by the window, vigilant as always, while Running Wolf sat cross-legged on the floor, seemingly at ease, despite the tension filling the room. Sarah had retired early, leaving the three of them to speak freely. You need to tell me everything, Clara said, pouring coffee into mismatched cups. No more half-truths or protective omissions? Thomas nodded, reaching into his saddlebag. He withdrew a folded paper, worn at the creases from being carried long distances. As he spread it on the table, Clara recognized the bold, wanted lettering of a territorial marshal's poster. James Hollister's cold eyes stared up from the crude likeness. The reward, $5,000, dead or alive, spoke to the seriousness of his crimes. Multiple murders, robbery, arson were listed beneath his name. I first encountered Hollister in '71, Thomas began, his voice dropping to the measured cadence he used for difficult truths. He and his gang raided an Apache settlement while I was tracking cattle rustlers nearby. By the time I arrived, they'd murdered everyone, including the children. Clara's hand went to her throat. Dear God, my mother's cousin was among them, Thomas continued. I tracked Hollister for 6 weeks before cornering him near the Sonora border. He escaped, but I managed to capture his younger brother. Running Wolf nodded solemnly. The brother faced justice. Hollister swore blood vengeance. For the next 2 years, I hunted him across 3 territories, Thomas said. Then I met you, Clara. Clara's eyes remained fixed on the wanted poster. You were still a marshal when we met. Yes, but I'd requested reassignment to this region. I was tired of the hunt, wanted someone to come home to. A small, unwelcome flutter stirred in Clara's chest at his words. Then one night, I received intelligence about Hollister's location, Thomas continued. But when I returned to my quarters, I found this. He withdrew a yellowed note from the same saddlebag. Clara accepted it gingerly. The handwriting was crude, the message chilling. Come alone or your woman dies screaming. I'll save her eyes for last so she can watch what I do to her. Why didn't you tell me? She whispered. I thought I was protecting you. Thomas's voice held no defense, only the weight of regret. I feared if you knew you'd insist on being involved or would worry endlessly while I was gone. So you just disappeared. The hurt was still raw, even after his earlier explanation. I left a letter with Marshal Dawson to deliver if I didn't return in 2 weeks, Thomas explained. Explaining everything. After I was ambushed, Hollister must have intercepted it. Running Wolf spoke up. The ambush was well planned. 7 men waited at the meeting place. They shot Brother Thomas, then dragged him to Mexico, where no American lawman would look. Hollister had connections with the Rurales, Mexican federal police, Thomas added. They threw me into Sonora prison under a false name. Even kept me separate from other American prisoners. Clara closed her eyes, absorbing the magnitude of what he'd endured. And after your escape, the letters you mentioned, I sent 3 through different channels. All intercepted. Thomas's jaw tightened. Hollister had been busy during my imprisonment. Built connections, gained influence, became valuable to powerful men like Blackwood. What does he want now? Clara asked. To finish what he started. Thomas met her gaze directly. He doesn't just want me dead, Clara. He wants me to suffer first, by taking away anything I care about. The implication hung heavy between them. That includes you, Thomas said softly. It always has. Clara stood abruptly, moving to the window. Outside, a sliver of moon illuminated the quiet street. 12 years, Thomas. I built a life. Learned to stand on my own. I can't simply collapse back into being someone who needs your protection. I know. He didn't approach her, respecting the distance she needed. You're stronger now than the woman I left. I see that clearly. Running Wolf had been watching their exchange with quiet understanding. The female eagle does not need the male to hunt, he observed. But they defend the nest together. Clara turned from the window. What exactly are you suggesting? An alliance, Thomas replied. Not based on the past, but on the present threat we both face. Hollister wants revenge against me. Blackwood wants your land. They're working together to get both. Clara studied the wanted poster again, memorizing Hollister's features. If I work with you on this, Thomas, it doesn't mean... She trailed off, unsure how to finish. It doesn't mean forgiveness, Thomas completed for her, or that we return to what was before. I understand, Clara nodded, a decision forming. Then we have an agreement, a temporary alliance against common enemies. Thomas extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Clara took it. His palm was warm against hers, calloused in different places than she remembered, new hardships written on his skin, just as they were on his face. One condition, she added, withdrawing her hand. No more secrets between us. Not about this. No more secrets, Thomas agreed, his eyes never leaving hers. You have my word. For the first time in 12 years, Clara believed him completely. The town hall was packed beyond capacity, forcing latecomers to stand along the walls. Edmund Blackwood commanded the center of the room, unrolling elaborate maps and architectural renderings with theatrical flourish. Clara sat between Judge Wilson and Mr. Green, the livery stable owner, while Thomas positioned himself near the back door, watching both Blackwood and the crowd. "My friends," Blackwood projected his voice with practiced charm, "today marks the beginning of a new era for your community. The Western Continental Railroad will transform this modest settlement into a commercial powerhouse." Mayor Atkins nodded enthusiastically beside him. Clara noted how the mayor's new gold pocket watch gleamed in the lamplight, an expensive accessory that had appeared shortly after Blackwood's arrival. "Mr. Blackwood has generously shared copies of the proposed contract," Atkins announced, distributing several identical leather-bound documents to the town council members. Clara accepted one, quickly scanning the dense legal language. Her years of managing business contracts had taught her to look beyond flowery promises to the binding terms. Section 12 grants the railroad company rights to all mineral deposits discovered during construction, she observed aloud. "That seems unusually broad." Blackwood's smile remained fixed, though his eyes hardened. "A standard provision, Miss Bennet, merely protecting our investment. And Section 23, Judge Wilson added, adjusting his spectacles, appears to grant the company water rights, extending half a mile on either side of the track." A murmur rippled through the audience. Water rights were sacred in the territory, often more valuable than the land itself. "These details can be discussed privately with affected landowners," Blackwood suggested smoothly. "The important consideration is the prosperity this railroad brings to all of you." Clara stood, holding the contract. "With respect, Mr. Blackwood, these aren't minor details. This document effectively surrenders control of our most valuable resources to your company in perpetuity." Several voices called out in agreement. Clara noted the ranchers and farmers, those who understood the critical importance of water rights, were particularly vocal. "Miss Bennet," Blackwood responded, his tone condescending, "these matters are perhaps better understood by those with experience in large commercial ventures." "I've been running a successful business for 10 years, Clara countered evenly. "Long enough to recognize when a contract favors one party at the expense of the other." From the back, Thomas watched with quiet pride as Clara commanded the room's attention. She had grown into a formidable advocate, articulate and knowledgeable in ways the young woman he'd left behind had only hinted at becoming. Running Wolf rose from his seat near the Apache representatives. "The contract makes no mention of existing agreements with tribal lands," he noted. "Our hunting grounds lie directly in the proposed path." Blackwood waved dismissively. "The territorial government has already addressed native concerns." "Without consultation," Running Wolf replied. "This violates the treaties of 1866. Clara seized the opening. "Mr. Blackwood, your company appears to be proceeding with remarkable confidence about securing these rights of way, almost as if the outcome were predetermined." A flash of annoyance crossed Blackwood's face before he recovered his composure. "We're simply well prepared, Miss Bennet. Progress requires foresight, or perhaps advance arrangements." Clara held up the contract, pointing to the signature page. "The territorial governor's approval is already notarized, dated 3 months ago, before you even approached our town council." Gasps and angry mutterings spread through the crowd. Mayor Atkins shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his collar. "A preliminary endorsement only," Blackwood insisted, shooting a warning glance at the mayor. Thomas chose that moment to step forward. "Perhaps the mayor could explain why his signature appears on page 36, dated last month, when this is supposedly our first formal discussion of the terms." All eyes turned to Mayor Atkins, whose face had gone deathly pale. That is, Mr. Blackwood requested an initial review," he stammered. "What the mayor means," Clara interjected, "is that decisions affecting all our futures were being made behind closed doors." The meeting dissolved into heated arguments. Judge Wilson called for order while Blackwood conferred urgently with his associates. Thomas made his way to Clara's side. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest," he murmured. "Someone had to," she replied. "Did you see how many officials have already signed? This was never a negotiation. It's a land grab, disguised as progress." As people began filing out, Blackwood approached them, his mask of geniality gone. "You're making a grave mistake," he warned Clara. "This railroad will be built, with or without your cooperation. Not across my land," Clara responded firmly. "We'll see." Blackwood's gaze shifted to Thomas. "Interesting company you keep these days, Miss Bennet. I wonder if you know all there is to know about your protector." Thomas met his stare evenly. "Careful, Blackwood. Threats only work when they remain implied." "Oh, I haven't begun to threaten," Blackwood replied softly. "But Hollister sends his regards. He's looking forward to renewing your acquaintance." After he departed, Clara turned to Thomas. He confirmed it. "Hollister is working with him." Thomas nodded grimly. "And he knows who I am. The game has changed." Clara clutched the railroad contract, the document that had exposed the corruption extending throughout the territorial government. "We need allies," she said. "People we can trust." Thomas looked around at the dispersing townsfolk, some angry, others frightened. "Judge Wilson, Deputy Jackson, Running Wolf's people. It's a start. Against Blackwood's money and Hollister's guns?" Clara asked. Thomas's hand briefly touched hers, a fleeting gesture of reassurance. "Against those odds, I'd still bet on you, Clara Bennet." Despite everything, she found herself smiling. "Then we'd better start planning our next move." The midday sun beat down mercilessly as Clara finished tallying the morning sales. Business had been unusually brisk, whether from genuine need or curiosity about her confrontation with Blackwood. She couldn't say. "You should eat something," Sarah admonished, placing a plate of cold chicken and biscuits on the counter. "Can't fight railroad barons on an empty stomach," Clara smiled gratefully. "Has Thomas returned?" "Not yet. He and Deputy Jackson rode out to speak with the outlying ranchers." Sarah poured water from a canteen into a cup. "Running Wolf left this for you. Said it contains special herbs to strengthen the spirit." Clara reached for the cup, then paused as Sarah sniffed suspiciously at the canteen. "Something's not right," Sarah muttered, her nose wrinkling. "This smells like—" She stopped abruptly, face paling. "Don't drink that." Clara withdrew her hand. "What is it?" "Bitter almonds." Sarah's voice shook. "My first husband was a pharmacist. That's cyanide, Clara." A chill ran through Clara despite the heat. "Are you certain?" "Absolutely. Someone's tampered with it." Sarah carefully set the canteen aside. "This wasn't from Running Wolf." Clara's mind raced. "Who had access to the trading post this morning?" "Dozens of people," Sarah replied. "We've been busy since sunup." The bell above the door chimed as Judge Wilson entered, his expression grave. "Clara, there's trouble." He removed his hat, revealing wisps of white hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. "Someone broke into your storeroom last night." Clara frowned. "That's impossible." "I would have heard, not the trading post," he clarified. "At your home. The sheriff found your back door forced open when he made his rounds." Clara hurried to her adjoining house with Sarah and the judge following. The modest parlor appeared untouched, but her bedroom had been ransacked. Drawers emptied onto the floor, mattress slashed open. Her personal items scattered carelessly. They were looking for something, Judge Wilson observed. Clara's eyes went immediately to the loose floorboard where she kept her journal. The board had been pried up, the hiding place discovered. The journal was gone. On her bedroom wall, someone had used a knife to carve a crude message: "Sell or burn." "This has gone beyond business," Judge Wilson said quietly. "It's become dangerous. Perhaps you should reconsider Blackwood's offer and reward this behavior." Clara shook her head firmly. "Never." Sarah had been examining the vandalism with growing outrage. "First they try to poison you, then they violate your home. What's next?" "We should find Thomas," the judge suggested. "After that business at the town meeting, I fear Blackwood's men have dropped all pretense of civility." As if summoned by his name, Thomas appeared in the doorway, his expression darkening as he took in the destruction. Deputy Jackson stood behind him, hand resting instinctively on his holster. "Are you hurt?" Thomas asked Clara immediately. I'm fine, but someone tampered with the canteen left for me. Sarah recognized the smell of cyanide. Thomas and Jackson exchanged grim looks. This changes things, Jackson said. Vandalism is one matter. Attempted murder is another. Thomas examined the carved threat on the wall, his fingers tracing the rough edges of the letters. This isn't Blackwood's style. It's too crude, too direct. Hollister, Clara guessed. Thomas nodded. He's always preferred intimidation to subtlety. Clara struggled to maintain her composure. They took my journal. 12 years of private thoughts. She trailed off, unwilling to reveal its full contents. Thomas understood immediately. Your letters to me, she nodded, embarrassed. Among other things, he turned to Jackson. The marshal's office needs to take this seriously. I am, Jackson assured him. But with Mayor Atkins in Blackwood's pocket, my authority only stretches so far. He gestured to the destruction around them. Miss Bennett shouldn't stay here tonight. It's not safe. She can stay with us, Judge Wilson offered. Martha would welcome the company, and our home is always guarded. Thomas shook his head. Hollister will expect that. He'll be watching all her friends. I'm not leaving my property, Clara stated firmly. That's exactly what they want. Thomas stepped closer, lowering his voice. Clara, be reasonable. They've already made 2 attempts. Then we'll be prepared for the 3rd, she interrupted. This is my home, Thomas. Everything I've built over 12 years. I won't be driven out by threats, their eyes locked in silent struggle. Finally, Thomas sighed. Then I'll stay too. Before she could protest, he added, not in your house, the boarding house, but close enough to hear if there's trouble. Clara wanted to refuse, to prove she could protect herself, but practicality won out over pride. Fine, but just until we resolve this situation. As the others moved to help clean up the damage, Thomas remained beside her. His presence solid and reassuring, despite their complicated past. We'll find who did this, he promised quietly. Clara stooped to gather scattered papers from her floor. When you rode out this morning, did you learn anything useful? The ranchers are with you, he replied. Blackwood's water rights demands would ruin most of them. They're willing to stand together. She glanced up at him. That's something, at least. Their hands brushed as they both reached for the same fallen book. For a moment, neither moved away. Your journal, Thomas said softly. I'm sorry. I know how much stock you place in your privacy. Clara straightened, suddenly aware of their proximity. It's not the privacy that concerns me. It's what they might do with the words inside. Thomas's eyes held hers. Whatever you wrote about me, Clara, whatever anger or hurt, I deserved it. She looked away first. It wasn't all anger, Thomas. That's what makes it worse. The vulnerability in her admission hung between them. More revealing than any vandalized room or stolen journal could ever be. Rain drummed steadily against the windows as Clara sat alone in her kitchen. The trading post was closed for the evening. Sarah had gone home, and Thomas was meeting with Running Wolf to arrange additional security. The house felt eerily quiet after the chaos of discovering the vandalism. Clara had spent hours restoring order to her violated space, but something fundamental had changed. This home that had represented her hard-won independence now felt vulnerable, exposed. She pulled a small wooden box from its new hiding place beneath a loose brick in the hearth. Inside lay her mother's wedding ring, a simple gold band that had survived the journey west, childbirth, widowhood, and finally consumption. Clara had worn it on a chain around her neck after her mother's death, until Thomas disappeared. Then she'd put it away, unable to bear the reminder of enduring love when her own had vanished. A knock at the kitchen door startled her. She quickly tucked the ring away and reached for the shotgun before recognizing Thomas's distinctive pattern. 3 raps. Pause, 2 more, it's unlocked, she called, returning the weapon to its place beside the door. Thomas entered, rain dripping from his hat and coat. He removed both, hanging them on the peg with the casual familiarity of a man who had once been welcome in this space. The domesticity of the gesture made Clara's chest tighten. Running Wolf has stationed 2 of his best hunters nearby, he reported. They'll keep watch through the night. Thank you. Clara gestured to the coffee pot on the stove. It's still hot. Thomas poured himself a cup, then sat across from her at the kitchen table. For a moment, neither spoke, the rain filling the silence between them. 12 years, Clara said finally, her voice barely audible above the storm. 12 years of not knowing. Do you have any idea what that was like? Thomas set his cup down carefully. I've imagined it every day since I left. I waited 3 years, she continued, the words spilling out as if a dam had broken. 3 years believing you might return, jumping at every sound of approaching horses. I told myself you had your reasons, that something must have happened. Thomas remained silent, allowing her the space to unburden herself. After 3 years, Judge Wilson convinced me to have you declared legally dead. Her voice cracked. We held a memorial service. Just a few of us. I wore black for 6 months. Clara, no, let me finish. She stood pacing the small kitchen. After that, I forced myself to move forward. Built this business. Made a life without you. Turned down 2 proposals from decent men because they weren't. She stopped, steadying herself against the counter. Thomas watched her, his face reflecting every ounce of her pain. Because they weren't me, he finished softly. Because they weren't you, she admitted, the truth finally spoken aloud after so many years. And I hated myself for it. For holding on to a ghost. Thomas rose slowly, closing the distance between them with cautious steps. I never wanted to cause you pain. If I could have found a way to let you know I was alive without putting you at risk, I would have. I believe you. The admission cost her, but it was honest. I believe you tried to return. I believe you sent letters. I even believe you thought you were protecting me. She looked up at him, her eyes glistening. But understanding doesn't erase 12 years, Thomas. I know. He was close enough now that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, carved by sun and hardship and regret. I'm not asking for what we had before. That belongs to different people, the ones we used to be. Then what are you asking for? His hand hovered near her face, not quite touching. A chance to know who you are now. To let you know who I've become. The kitchen felt suddenly too small, too intimate. Clara stepped back, needing distance to think clearly. As she moved, her elbow knocked against the brick where she'd hidden the box. It shifted slightly. Thomas noticed immediately. You kept it, he said, recognition in his voice. Clara didn't pretend to misunderstand. My mother's ring, yes. You were wearing it the day we met, he recalled. On a chain. I put it away after you left, she admitted. It felt wrong to wear a symbol of enduring love when mine had disappeared. Thomas's expression softened with understanding. Your mother survived 20 years without your father. She kept his memory alive in that ring. She never stopped loving him, Clara whispered, even when everyone told her to move on. To be practical, the parallels hung unspoken between them. Thomas took a careful step forward, closing the distance she'd created. Clara, he said, her name a prayer on his lips. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I need you to know that not a single day passed when I didn't think of you. When I didn't regret leaving you the way I did, something broke inside her, the carefully constructed wall she'd built around her heart for 12 long years. Without conscious decision, she moved toward him, her hands finding the familiar contours of his face, changed by time yet essentially the same. I was so angry with you, she whispered. You had every right to be. His hands remained at his sides, letting her set the boundaries of this fragile moment. I still am, she admitted, but I'm tired of letting that anger keep me prisoner just as surely as that Mexican jail held you. When she kissed him, it wasn't the passionate reunion of storybooks. It was tentative, questioning, the first step on an uncertain path. His response was gentle, controlled, as if afraid she might shatter or flee. The kiss deepened, 12 years of longing condensed into a single moment. Thomas's arms finally encircled her, pulling her closer as rain pounded against the windows, and the world beyond this kitchen ceased to exist. A sudden pounding on the front door tore them apart. Deputy Jackson's voice called urgently through the wood. Thomas! Clara, come quick. Blackwood's men are threatening to burn out the Apache settlement. Reality crashed back with brutal force. Thomas's forehead rested briefly against Clara's. "We're not finished with this conversation," he promised softly. Clara nodded, already reaching for her coat. "No," she agreed. "We're just beginning." The rain had stopped by the time they reached the Apache settlement, leaving behind a slick, treacherous trail and the lingering scent of wet sage. Deputy Jackson rode ahead, while Thomas and Clara followed on a single horse, her arms wrapped tightly around his waist. Tension radiated from Thomas's body as they crested the final ridge. Below, lanterns illuminated a standoff between Running Wolf's people and half a dozen of Blackwood's men. The Apache had formed a protective circle around their dwellings, armed but disciplined. "Stay behind me," Thomas instructed as they dismounted. Clara ignored him, moving forward to stand at his side. "These are my neighbors, too." Thomas didn't argue, recognizing the determination in her voice. Together with Jackson, they approached the confrontation. "Well, if it isn't the half-breed and his woman," sneered a familiar voice. The taller man from the trading post incident stepped forward, a torch flickering in his hand. "This doesn't concern you, Apache. You're threatening these people on their own land," Thomas replied evenly. "That concerns me directly." Running Wolf acknowledged their arrival with a solemn nod. "They claim we harbor thieves who stole from their camp." "Convenient excuse," Clara observed. "Just like the misunderstanding at my trading post." The spokesman for Blackwood's men spat on the ground. "Mr. Blackwood sent us to recover stolen property. These savages—" "Choose your next words carefully," Thomas interrupted. His voice deadly quiet. The man hesitated, reassessing the situation as he noticed Deputy Jackson's badge gleaming in the torchlight. "These people," he amended with exaggerated courtesy, "have something that belongs to Mr. Blackwood. We aim to recover it." "What exactly was stolen?" Jackson demanded. "Important documents." "Business papers," Clara stepped forward. "Would these business papers happen to include a certain journal taken from my home yesterday?" A flicker of surprise crossed the man's face before he regained his composure. "Don't know anything about that, ma'am," Running Wolf addressed Thomas in Apache, his words flowing too quickly for Clara to follow with her limited understanding of the language. Thomas replied in the same tongue, then turned to Jackson. "They've stolen nothing. This is a pretext to intimidate Running Wolf's people because they refuse to sell their hunting rights to Blackwood." "That true?" Jackson asked the spokesman. "Indians lie," the man replied with a shrug. "Mr. Blackwood's just trying to be neighborly, offering fair compensation for land they barely use." "This land has been ours for generations," Running Wolf stated with quiet dignity. "The Treaty of 1866 confirms our rights. We do not wish to sell." "Treaties change," another of Blackwood's men called out. "Especially when progress is at stake." Clara recognized the familiar rhetoric. "The same progress Blackwood promised our town? The kind that drains our water rights and claims our mineral deposits." Murmurs spread among both groups. Clara realized some of the Apache men were following her words, understanding more English than they typically revealed to outsiders. "You're outnumbered," Thomas observed calmly. 6 men against 20 warriors plus a deputy marshal. He gestured toward Jackson. "I suggest you leave peacefully." The spokesman's hand drifted toward his holster. "We've got more men at camp. One signal shot would bring my entire tribe," Running Wolf interrupted. "Who watch from the ridges even now?" Clara followed his gaze to the surrounding hills, where she could just make out silhouettes against the night sky. Apache. Sentinels positioned strategically around the settlement. Tension hung in the air for several heartbeats, before the spokesman lowered his torch. "This isn't over. Mr. Blackwood doesn't take kindly to interference." "Neither do I," Thomas replied. After Blackwood's men retreated, the atmosphere in the settlement remained vigilant. Running Wolf invited them to sit by the central fire, where elders had gathered to discuss the confrontation. An elderly woman approached, her face deeply lined with age and wisdom. Running Wolf introduced her respectfully. "My grandmother, Morningstar. She helped heal Brother Thomas after his escape." Morningstar studied Clara with knowing eyes. "So this is the one you carried in your heart?" she said to Thomas in accented English. I see why. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks as Thomas nodded. She is stronger than when I left, he replied. Wiser, and still angry, Morningstar observed with surprising perception. But the heart remembers what the mind tries to forget. She reached into her garment and withdrew a small leather pouch decorated with intricate beadwork and feathers. With ceremonial gravity, she placed it in Thomas's hands. Protection, she explained, touching the symbols embroidered on the leather. For both warrior and woman, against enemies seen and unseen. Thomas accepted the medicine pouch with reverence. Thank you, grandmother. Running Wolf explained to Clara, my grandmother saw visions of Thomas's return many moons ago. She prepared this medicine bundle knowing it would be needed. A young Apache woman approached, speaking urgently to Running Wolf in their native tongue. His expression darkened as he translated. My sister Nalin brings news. 2 of our scouts report Blackwood's men are not returning to town. They ride instead to a canyon meeting place. He looked significantly at Thomas. Another white man awaits them there. Hollister, Thomas guessed. Running Wolf nodded. The scouts heard mention of gold, rich deposits beneath the land where our people hunt and where Clara's trading post stands. So that's what this is about, Clara breathed. Not just the railroad. They're after gold. It explains Blackwood's insistence on mineral rights in the contract. Thomas agreed. He must have had a survey done secretly. Nalin spoke again, clutching her side with a grimace. Clara noticed blood seeping through the young woman's dress. She's hurt, Clara said, moving quickly to the girl's side. What happened? One of Blackwood's men saw her watching their camp, Running Wolf explained grimly. She escaped, but not before taking a bullet. I need clean cloth. Boiled water and your healing herbs, Clara instructed, helping Nalin to a nearby dwelling. As Thomas followed with the requested supplies, his eyes met Clara's with newfound respect. She worked methodically, using skills developed through years of frontier living to clean and dress the wound. Your hands are steady, he observed. You've done this before. Life doesn't stop for grief, Thomas, she replied softly. I've learned to do what needs doing. Morningstar joined them, adding her traditional remedies to Clara's practical care. The old woman smiled as she watched them work together. The eagle and his mate, she murmured. Different wings, same sky. Outside, Running Wolf and Jackson discussed strategy as the night deepened around the settlement. The battle lines had been drawn more clearly than ever, but for the first time in 12 years, Clara didn't feel alone facing the coming storm. Dawn broke clear and cool over the town as Clara opened the trading post. Despite the previous night's confrontation, routine offered comfort, a reminder that normal life continued alongside their growing troubles. You look tired, Sarah observed, arranging a display of canned goods. Though I suppose defending an Apache settlement will do that to a person, Clara smiled wryly. News traveled quickly in small communities. Word's already spread, I see, Judge Wilson told me this morning. Said you and Thomas stood together against Blackwood's bullies. Sarah studied her carefully. Something's changed between you two. Before Clara could respond, the bell above the door announced a customer, Mrs. Peterson, whose nervous energy was apparent as she clutched her handbag. Clara, dear, you should know, there's a meeting at the hotel. Mr. Blackwood's introducing his new security consultant. She lowered her voice. A dangerous-looking man. Cold eyes. Clara exchanged glances with Sarah. Did you catch his name? Hollister, I believe. James Hollister. The name hung in the air like gunsmoke. Clara maintained her composure with effort. Thank you for telling me. After Mrs. Peterson departed, Clara moved quickly to the back room. Find Thomas. He needs to know Hollister's in town openly now. Sarah nodded grimly. What will you do? Attend the meeting, Clara replied, checking her small Derringer pistol before tucking it into her pocket. Time to see our enemy face to face. Clara, no. If this man is as dangerous as Thomas says, then I need to know exactly what we're dealing with. Clara's tone brooked no argument. Thomas will be angry, but I can't hide while others fight my battles. The hotel's dining room was crowded when Clara arrived. She positioned herself near the back, partially concealed by a potted palm. Edmund Blackwood stood at the front, addressing the assembled townspeople with his usual practiced charm. "Assure you that recent incidents have been regrettable misunderstandings," he was saying, "which is precisely why I've engaged Mr. Hollister, whose expertise in security matters is unparalleled in the territory." The man who stepped forward triggered an involuntary chill down Clara's spine. Tall and lean, with silver-streaked dark hair and a meticulously trimmed mustache, James Hollister carried himself with the coiled readiness of a predator. His smile never reached his eyes, cold, assessing orbs that swept the room with calculated precision. "My associates perhaps demonstrated excessive zeal in their duties," Hollister stated, his cultured voice at odds with the latent violence in his bearing. "I assure you, under my supervision, order will be maintained with appropriate restraint." Clara studied the man who had haunted Thomas for years. The refinement of his appearance made him more rather than less frightening, evil wrapped in the veneer of civilization. "Western Continental Railroad represents the future," Hollister continued. "Those who embrace progress will prosper. Those who resist—" He allowed the implication to hang unfinished. "Are you threatening us, Mr. Hollister?" Judge Wilson challenged from the front row, "Merely stating economic realities, Your Honor." Hollister's smile tightened. "Change comes whether welcomed or not." As the meeting concluded, Clara prepared to slip away unnoticed. She'd seen enough, confirmed her worst fears about the man's dangerous charisma and implicit menace. But as she edged toward the door, Blackwood's voice cut through the crowd. "Miss Bennet! I'd hoped you would join us today." Heads turned in her direction. Clara straightened, abandoning stealth for dignity as Hollister's gaze found her. Something flickered in his cold eyes. Recognition, though they'd never met. "Mr. Blackwood," she acknowledged coolly. "Mr. Hollister." Hollister stepped toward her, extending his hand. "The famous Clara Bennet. Your reputation precedes you." Clara forced herself to accept the handshake, suppressing a shudder at his touch. "As does yours, Mr. Hollister, all exaggerated, I assure you." His fingers lingered over hers, a moment too long. "I understand you're the primary holdout against the railroad's planned route. I prefer to think of it as standing firm for fair terms," she replied evenly. Hollister studied her with unsettling intensity. "You remind me of someone I once knew, same determination." His gaze dropped to her hand. "You're trembling, Miss Bennet." "Do I frighten you?" Before Clara could answer, a familiar voice spoke from behind her. "She doesn't frighten easily, Hollister." Thomas stood in the doorway, his stance deceptively relaxed. The room went silent as recognition dawned on Hollister's face, replaced quickly by a predatory smile. "Thomas Apache," he drawled. "Back from the dead. How inconvenient." Thomas moved to Clara's side, his presence solid and reassuring. "Still hiding behind wealthy patrons, I see. And you're still championing lost causes." Hollister's hand moved to his vest pocket, withdrawing an ornate gold watch. He checked the time with deliberate casualness. 12 years, 4 months, and 18 days since our last encounter. I've been counting." Clara noticed the watch bore an engraving, a date that Thomas had mentioned in connection with the Apache massacre that began their enmity. "I remember every detail," Hollister continued, addressing Thomas, while his eyes remained fixed on Clara. "The ambush, the shots that should have killed you, the disappointment when I learned you'd survived in that Mexican prison." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Judge Wilson stepped forward, his expression thunderous. "Are you admitting to attempted murder, sir?" Hollister shrugged elegantly. "Ancient history, Your Honor, beyond any statute of limitations." He returned the watch to his pocket. "Besides, Mr. Apache and I have new business to discuss." "The past is merely context." Thomas's hand found Clara's, squeezing gently. "There's no discussion to be had, Hollister. Leave Miss Bennet and her property alone. Protecting her again." Hollister's smile widened. "How did that work out last time?" The taunt hung in the air between them. Clara felt Thomas tense beside her, but maintained her grip on his hand. "We're leaving," she announced, addressing the room rather than Hollister directly. Those interested in discussing Blackwood's railroad without threats or intimidation are welcome at the trading post tomorrow afternoon." As they turned to go, Hollister called after them. "She doesn't know, does she, Apache? The real reason I targeted her all those years ago." Thomas paused but didn't turn back. "Stay away from her, Hollister. Final warning." Outside, Clara released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That man is truly evil." "He's worse than I remembered," Thomas agreed grimly. "And now he knows you're important to me. That makes you his primary target." Clara met his concerned gaze steadily. "It was coming to that conclusion myself when you arrived." "You shouldn't have gone alone," Thomas admonished. "Hollister is unpredictable, dangerous, and now I've seen that for myself," she interrupted. "I needed to understand what we're facing." Thomas's expression softened with reluctant admiration. "You're either the bravest or the most stubborn woman I've ever known." "I believe I'm both," Clara replied, the ghost of a smile touching her lips despite the gravity of their situation. "What did he mean? About the real reason he targeted me before?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "A conversation for another time." His eyes scanned the street, noting the curious onlookers. "Right now we need to gather our allies. Hollister's arrival changes everything." Clara nodded, but filed away his evasion for future reference. Whatever secret Hollister had alluded to, she would uncover it eventually. There would be no more secrets between them. Thomas had promised. The back room of Judge Wilson's home had become their war council chamber. A large oak table dominated the space, covered now with documents, legal papers, and a detailed map of the territory that Thomas and Clara had spent the morning annotating. "Blackwood's men are positioned here and here," Thomas indicated, marking locations with small X's. "Running Wolf scouts report 20 armed men, split between the main camp and outposts along the proposed rail line." Deputy Jackson leaned over the map, studying their notations. "That's more firepower than a simple surveying operation requires." "Because it's not about surveying anymore," Clara pointed out. "It's about intimidation and gold." Judge Wilson adjusted his spectacles thoughtfully. "The territorial legislature won't respond to our telegraph for at least a week. Blackwood has friends in high places." "We don't have a week," Thomas replied. "Not with Hollister involved. He's never been one for patience." The group fell silent, contemplating their limited options. Besides Thomas and Clara, the council included Judge Wilson, Deputy Jackson, Running Wolf, and Mr. Green from the livery stable, who represented concerned business owners. "What if we focus on exposing Blackwood's true motives?" Clara suggested, tapping the geological survey reports they'd obtained. "If the territorial governor learns that Blackwood concealed the gold deposits to manipulate land prices..." "Blackwood will claim ignorance," Judge Wilson interjected. "His legal position remains technically sound." Thomas traced the boundaries of Clara's property on the map. "The legal approach takes too long. We need something more immediate." "The Apache do not fight from weakness," Running Wolf observed. "When outnumbered, we use the land itself against our enemies." A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah entered, her expression troubled. "There's a messenger from Blackwood. He's demanding to speak with Clara." They exchanged concerned glances. Clara nodded to Sarah. "Show him in." A young man in Western Continental Railroad livery entered, handing Clara an envelope with Blackwood's ornate seal. "Mr. Blackwood requests your presence at dinner this evening, Miss Bennett. 7 o'clock at the hotel." After the messenger departed, Clara broke the seal and read aloud. "Miss Bennett, recent tensions have resulted from unfortunate misunderstandings. I propose a private discussion of mutually beneficial arrangements. Mr. Hollister assures me a compromise is possible that will satisfy all parties." "It's a trap," Thomas stated flatly. "Obviously," Clara agreed. "But refusing outright gives them an excuse to escalate further." She turned the invitation over in her hands, thinking, "What if I accept? Keep Blackwood and Hollister distracted while you implement whatever strategy we develop?" Thomas's response was immediate. "Absolutely not. Hollister is too dangerous. It's a public venue," Clara countered. "The hotel dining room. They can hardly abduct me in front of the town's most prominent citizens." Deputy Jackson looked uncomfortable. She has a point, Thomas. It would buy us time and intelligence. A tense silence followed, as Thomas visibly struggled with the suggestion. Clara understood his reluctance. After 12 years of separation, the thought of her deliberately placing herself in Hollister's orbit must be intolerable to him. "I don't like it either," she said more gently. "But we need to be practical." Thomas's jaw tightened. "We'll develop an alternative." They spent the next several hours refining their strategy. The hand-drawn map became increasingly detailed as they marked vulnerable points in Blackwood's operation, potential allies among neighboring ranches, and defensive positions around Clara's property and the Apache settlement. As evening approached, the others departed to implement the first phase of their plan, gathering affidavits from landowners documenting Blackwood's threats and bribes. Clara and Thomas remained, making final notations on their map. "You're still planning to accept Blackwood's invitation," Thomas observed, setting down his pencil. Clara met his gaze steadily. "Yes, and you're still opposed. You know what Hollister is capable of. I'm not walking in blind, Thomas." She placed her hand over his on the table. "But sometimes the most direct approach is best." He turned his hand to clasp hers. "We've only just found each other again." The simple statement contained volumes: fear, regret, and something deeper that neither had fully acknowledged since his return. "Thomas." Clara moved closer, her voice softening. "What did Hollister mean yesterday? About the real reason he targeted me before?" Thomas's expression darkened. "Clara, no more secrets," she reminded him. "You promised." He sighed, resignation settling in his features. "Hollister didn't choose you randomly to get to me. Thomas hesitated. "He recognized what you meant to me because he'd been watching us for months. He knew I was planning to leave the Marshal's service." "Knew why?" Clara frowned. "I don't understand." Thomas's grip on her hand tightened. "The night before I left to track Hollister, I'd hidden something at the old oak by the creek. Something I was going to give you when I returned." Understanding dawned slowly. "An engagement ring," she whispered. He nodded. "My grandmother's. Hollister mentioned it in his threat note, details only someone who'd been watching us would know." Clara felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "All this time I thought you left without looking back." "I was coming back to stay," Thomas said quietly. "To build a life with you." The weight of what might have been hung between them, 12 years of shared happiness erased by Hollister's vengeance. Clara moved without conscious thought, closing the distance between them. Their kiss was different from the one in her kitchen, not tentative exploration, but something deeper, a recognition of paths lost and perhaps found again. Thomas's arms encircled her, drawing her against him, as if trying to reclaim the years stolen from them. When they finally separated, Clara rested her forehead against his. "That's why I need to face Blackwood and Hollister," she murmured. "Not just for my land or the town, for what they took from us." Thomas cupped her face in his hands. "Then we face them together. No more separation." "No more separation," she agreed. As twilight gathered outside, they bent once more over their map, revising their strategy. Whatever came next, they would meet it as they should have been for the past 12 years, side by side. The hotel dining room gleamed with uncharacteristic splendor. Blackwood had spared no expense, importing crystal and silverware for what he clearly intended as a demonstration of his power and refinement. Clara sat across from him at a private table, aware of curious glances from other diners. "You look lovely this evening, Miss Bennet," Blackwood observed, signaling the waiter to pour wine. "I appreciate your willingness to meet privately." "Hardly private," Clara replied, noting at least a dozen witnesses within earshot. She had dressed carefully for the occasion. Her best blue dress, hair arranged simply but elegantly, armor of a different sort than Thomas preferred. "A necessary compromise," Blackwood conceded. "Your friend, Mr. Apache, has made his protective instincts quite clear." Clara sipped her water, ignoring the wine. "You mentioned a proposal, Mr. Blackwood. I'm curious what could possibly constitute a mutually beneficial arrangement at this point." Blackwood leaned forward, his voice dropping confidentially. "I admire your business acumen, Miss Bennet. You've built something impressive from nothing, a quality I recognize and respect." "Flattery isn't negotiation," Clara observed. A thin smile crossed Blackwood's face. "Direct as always." "Very well." He withdrew a document from his jacket. "My final offer, triple the market value for your trading post, plus 5% interest in Western Continental Railroad's regional operations." Clara raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised by the generosity of the terms. "That's substantially more than your previous offers." "The situation has evolved," Blackwood gestured elegantly. "New factors must be considered, such as gold deposits beneath my property." Clara suggested mildly. Blackwood's composure slipped momentarily before he recovered with a practiced chuckle. "Rumors and speculation, though if such deposits existed, my offer accounts for them." The dining room doors opened, admitting James Hollister. He surveyed the room with calculated precision before approaching their table. Clara felt her muscles tense instinctively. "Ah, Mr. Hollister," Blackwood greeted him. "Perfect timing, Miss Bennet." Hollister inclined his head with exaggerated courtesy. "I trust you're enjoying your evening." Clara met his cold gaze directly. "Mr. Blackwood was just explaining why his offer has suddenly become so generous." Hollister's lip curled slightly. "Edmund appreciates the changing landscape, as should you." Something in his tone sent a chill down Clara's spine. Before she could respond, Deputy Jackson appeared at her elbow. "Pardon the interruption," he said, his expression grim. "Miss Bennet, there's an urgent situation requiring your attention." Alarm flared through her. "What's happened?" "It's your trading post, ma'am. There's been a fire." Clara stood immediately, blood draining from her face. "How bad?" "Bad enough," Jackson replied, casting a significant look toward Blackwood and Hollister. "You should come right away." Blackwood rose, the picture of concerned innocence. "What a dreadful coincidence. I hope the damage is minimal." "Coincidence," Clara repeated, the word like ash in her mouth. "Of course." Jackson escorted her outside where Thomas waited with horses ready. His face confirmed her worst fears. "How much is lost?" she asked as they mounted. "Most of it," Thomas answered grimly. "The main structure is still standing, but the storeroom and your living quarters—" They rode in tense silence through the darkening streets. As they approached the trading post, Clara saw orange flames still flickering amid the partially collapsed roof of her home. Neighbors formed a bucket brigade, fighting to save what remained of the main store. Sarah rushed to meet her, face streaked with soot. "Thank God you're safe. I was afraid they'd gotten to you too. Who did this?" Clara demanded, dismounting. "Two of Blackwood's men," Thomas answered. "Caught in the act by Running Wolf's scouts. One escaped. The other is in Jackson's jail." Clara surveyed the destruction. Her home, her independence, 12 years of work reduced to smoldering timbers. The shock gave way to a cold, clear anger. "This was meant to happen while I dined with Blackwood," she realized. "He wanted an alibi," Thomas nodded. "And to keep you away while they destroyed everything." Judge Wilson approached, holding a crumpled yellow paper. "This arrived for you an hour ago." The telegraph operator brought it when he heard about the fire. Clara smoothed the telegram. It had been addressed to the mayor, but delivered to the judge instead. A stroke of fortune that would prove Blackwood's undoing. "Proceed with final solution," the message read. "Eliminate all opposition by whatever means necessary. Full deniability essential, Blackwood." "The mayor was in on it," Clara said, passing the telegram to Thomas. "He was supposed to destroy this." Thomas read it, his expression darkening. "Blackwood's getting desperate. This order would hang him in any territorial court. And it came today, just before this accidental fire," Judge Wilson added. "Damning evidence." Clara moved closer to the burning building, the heat searing her face. Among the scattered belongings pulled from the flames, she spotted a leather-bound volume, her journal. "Somehow recovered and returned. Running Wolf found it at Blackwood's camp," Thomas explained, following her gaze. "His men retrieved it during the confusion." Clara picked up the singed journal, its pages water-damaged, but largely intact. "They took everything I built, thinking it would break me." "They don't know you very well," Thomas replied softly. She turned to face him. the burning building, casting flickering light across her determined features. No, they don't, and that will be their downfall. Sarah approached hesitantly. Clara, you can stay with me tonight? Thank you, but no. Clara looked toward the boarding house, still intact behind the trading post. I'll stay in one of the rooms. This is still my property. As neighbors continued fighting the blaze, Clara, Thomas, and their allies gathered in the boarding house parlor. The intercepted telegram lay at the center of the table, undeniable proof of Blackwood's criminal intent. We have him, Deputy Jackson declared. This is enough for an arrest warrant. He'll claim the telegram is forged, Thomas cautioned. Then we need more, Clara decided. And I know exactly how to get it. She outlined her plan quickly, drawing on everything they'd learned about Blackwood's operation and Hollister's patterns. The others listened with growing approval. It's risky, Judge Wilson warned when she finished. So is allowing criminals to destroy our homes with impunity, Clara countered. We end this now, before anyone else suffers. Thomas's hand found hers under the table, a silent gesture of support and solidarity. Clara squeezed back, drawing strength from the connection. Blackwood and Hollister had miscalculated badly. They believed destroying her property would break her spirit. Instead, it had only hardened her resolve. Tomorrow, she said with quiet determination. We finish this tomorrow. The message arrived at dawn, a crude note delivered by a terrified stable boy. We have your woman, Canyon Creek mine. Come alone or she dies. Hollister. Thomas stared at the paper, ice spreading through his veins. He'd risen early to check the perimeter they'd established around the boarding house, leaving Clara sleeping safely, or so he'd thought. Deputy Jackson examined the boarding house room, his expression grim. No signs of struggle. She must have gone willingly, or never saw them coming, Thomas replied, tucking his father's hunting knife into his boot, a Damascus steel blade with an antler handle etched with Apache symbols of protection. His grandfather had carried it through decades of tribal conflicts, his father through the Civil War. Now it would face Hollister. This changes everything, Judge Wilson said. We need to alert the territorial marshal. No time, Thomas cut him off. Canyon Creek is 3 hours' ride. By the time help arrives, he left the implications unspoken. Running Wolf stepped forward. My scouts report movement at Blackwood's camp. Many men riding toward the old mine. Thomas checked his revolver methodically. They're expecting me to rush in blindly, which is exactly what you're planning, Jackson observed. No. Thomas's voice was cold, controlled. I'm planning to end this, but not alone. He turned to Running Wolf. Your best hunters, the ones who can move unseen. Are they ready? The Apache nodded solemnly. They await your word, brother. Thomas outlined his strategy quickly. Jackson and Judge Wilson exchanged concerned glances, but recognized the steel in his voice. This was the legendary Alpha Apache, the tracker and lawman whose name once struck fear into the territory's worst criminals. 1 hour, Thomas concluded. Then we move. Clara tested her bonds for the dozenth time, wincing as the rough rope bit into her wrists. The abandoned mines office was dusty but solid, its boarded windows admitting thin stripes of morning light. She'd been foolish, answering a supposed cry for help outside her window, a mistake that wouldn't happen again, assuming she survived this day. The door swung open, revealing James Hollister. He carried himself with the same elegant menace as always, though now he made no effort to disguise his satisfaction. "Comfortable, Miss Bennet?" he inquired conversationally. "Remarkably," she replied, matching his tone. "Though your hospitality leaves something to be desired." A thin smile crossed his face. "Spirited to the end. I can see why Thomas was so taken with you." He checked his gold watch. "He should be receiving our invitation about now." "He won't come alone," Clara warned, though she feared the opposite was true. "Oh, I'm counting on his Apache stubbornness," Hollister replied. "His predictable nobility." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. 12 years I've waited to finish what began in that canyon. 12 years planning how to destroy everything he cares about before killing him. Why?" Clara demanded. "What did he do to earn such hatred?" Hollister's mask slipped, revealing something rabid beneath the refinement. "He took my brother. The only family I had. Your brother murdered innocent people, Clara countered. Thomas was upholding the law. The law, Hollister spat. White man's justice selectively applied. My brother robbed a bank. Those Apache your precious Thomas defends? They've raided settlements for generations. That doesn't justify massacre. Hollister's eyes hardened. Justify? I don't seek justification, Miss Bennet. Only equilibrium. Thomas took my blood. I'll take what he loves most. His gaze raked over her appraisingly. And he's coming to watch it happen. He turned as Blackwood entered, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Everything's in place, Blackwood reported. Though I still believe this personal vendetta unnecessarily complicates our business objectives. Our objectives align perfectly, Hollister replied coldly. You get the land. I get my revenge. Clara watched their interaction carefully, noting the power dynamic. Blackwood might provide the money and connections, but Hollister controlled the violence that enforced their plans. And Blackwood feared him. What about afterward? Blackwood pressed. The territorial marshal will find 2 outlaws who tragically killed each other and their hostage before being shot by your men protecting themselves. Hollister finished smoothly. A regrettable incident during your legitimate business expansion. Clara felt bile rise in her throat at the calculated evil of their plan. Blackwood at least had the decency to avoid her gaze. Post the men as discussed, Hollister instructed. Apache is a tracker. He'll avoid the obvious approaches. After Blackwood departed, Hollister turned back to Clara. You have perhaps 2 hours left. I suggest you make peace with whatever god you worship. You underestimate Thomas, Clara said quietly. And me? Hollister's smile returned, colder than before. No, Miss Bennet. I've spent 12 years ensuring I don't. Thomas crouched on the ridge, overlooking Canyon Creek Mine, studying the operation through his field glass. 15 men positioned around the perimeter. 2 guards at the main entrance. Hollister would be inside with Clara, probably in the old office where the foreman once managed the now abandoned operation. Beside him, Running Wolf pointed to nearly invisible figures moving through the scrub, his hunters taking position. On the opposite ridge, Deputy Jackson and Judge Wilson waited with a contingent of town volunteers. Remember, Thomas instructed softly, Blackwood's men are hired guns. Many will flee once the odds turn. Hollister is mine. Running Wolf nodded, his weathered face solemn. The spirits of our ancestors ride with you, brother. He pressed something into Thomas's palm, a small carved stone bear, a symbol of protection. From grandmother. For both warrior and woman, Thomas tucked the talisman into his shirt pocket, next to his heart. If I don't return, you will return, Running Wolf interrupted. With your woman. It is seen. Thomas clasped his friend's arm briefly, then began his descent into the canyon. His Apache heritage served him now, as he moved silently through terrain most men would find impassable. Invisible to the sentries scanning the obvious paths, the hunting knife rode against his ankle, its familiar weight reassuring. Guns had their place, but in the close quarters he anticipated. The blade his ancestors had carried might make the difference between life and death, between losing Clara again or bringing her home. Clara sat on the boarding house porch, watching the sunrise illuminate the blackened timbers of her former home. 2 weeks had passed since the showdown at Canyon Creek Mine, yet the events remained vivid in her mind. Thomas slipping through Hollister's defenses, the desperate fight that left him wounded but victorious, and the timely arrival of their allies that prevented Blackwood's escape. Her wrists still bore fading marks from the ropes, but the physical reminders were healing faster than the emotional ones. She sipped her coffee, finding comfort in the simple routine. You're up early, Thomas observed, emerging from the boarding house. He moved carefully, his side still tender from Hollister's blade. Couldn't sleep, she admitted. Too many thoughts. He settled beside her on the bench, their shoulders touching lightly. The easy physical proximity between them was still new, a bridge gradually rebuilding after 12 years of separation. Regrets? He asked quietly. Clara considered the question. No. Not about Hollister, if that's what you mean. The papers had arrived yesterday, official confirmation that James Hollister had died of his wounds while awaiting trial. Blackwood faced charges of conspiracy, attempted murder and fraud, his railroad empire crumbling as investigations uncovered the full extent of his corruption. I meant about us, Thomas clarified. About what happens next. Clara turned to study his face in the morning light. The past weeks had softened something in him, the vigilant tension he'd carried since his return, gradually yielding to a cautious peace. "I have a proposition," she said, reaching into her pocket. She withdrew a folded paper, spreading it carefully on her lap. "Sarah's husband was a decent architect before he passed. She found his old drafting tools for me." Thomas examined the sketch, detailed building plans for a new trading post, larger than the original, with an adjoining home designed for a family rather than a solitary woman. "You're rebuilding," he noted, tracing the careful lines with his fingertip. "We're rebuilding," Clara corrected. "If you're staying," their eyes met, the question hanging between them. So much remained unspoken, the future neither had dared imagine during the urgent days of crisis. "The territorial governor offered me a position," Thomas said carefully. "Peace officer for the region, with authority to liaise between settlers and native tribes." Clara nodded, unsurprised. Thomas's actions at Canyon Creek had reached the territorial capital, restoring his reputation and more. "It's fitting. Your dual heritage makes you uniquely qualified. It would mean traveling," he continued, "but having a home to return to." Clara's hand found his, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Is that what you want? After everything?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. 12 years ago, I was going to ask you to marry me. I had dreams then of building something permanent, a legacy beyond tracking outlaws and enforcing other men's laws. And now?" Clara prompted softly. "Now I understand how quickly everything can vanish," he replied, "but also how some things endure, despite time and distance." He touched her cheek gently. "What I want hasn't changed, Clara, only deepened." Clara leaned into his touch, her reserve finally crumbling. "I thought I'd moved beyond you," she confessed. "Built walls strong enough to keep the past contained. Then you returned, and I realized those walls had just been holding me prisoner instead." From down the street came the sounds of the town awakening, shopkeepers opening, wagons moving, life continuing. On the vacant lot beside them, a crew of workers had already begun clearing debris, preparing the ground for new construction. Judge Wilson had organized volunteers, the community rallying around Clara with surprising solidarity. "Running Wolf's grandmother wants to host a ceremony," Thomas mentioned. "A blessing for our new beginning. She's quite insistent," Clara smiled. "I'd like that. A blending of your traditions with our future." Thomas hesitated, then reached into his shirt pocket. "I found something." While clearing the rubble yesterday, he opened his hand, revealing a small, soot-stained object that made Clara's breath catch. Her mother's wedding ring somehow survived the fire, blackened but intact. "It was buried beneath where your floorboards collapsed," Thomas explained, "almost as if it was waiting to be found again." Clara accepted the ring with trembling fingers. "Some things are meant to endure," she whispered, echoing his earlier sentiment. Thomas took her hand, his expression solemn. "Clara Bennett, I've loved you across 12 years and 1,000 miles. Will you build this future with me as my wife?" The simplicity of his proposal, so different from the grand gesture he might have planned in their youth, touched her deeply. They had both been stripped to their essentials, pretense and posturing, burned away by time and trials. "Yes," she answered, equally simple. "I will." He slipped the ring onto her finger, its tarnished surface catching the morning light. Like them, it was changed by fire but fundamentally unbroken. Later that afternoon, they walked the foundation lines of what would become their new home and business. Running Wolf and his grandmother joined them, performing a traditional blessing with sage and prayer. Judge Wilson brought documents transferring the adjoining, not to Clara's ownership, a gift from townspeople grateful for her stand against corruption. The Territorial Marshal arrives tomorrow to take statements, Deputy Jackson informed them. Blackwood's trial is scheduled for next month. We'll be ready, Thomas assured him. As the others departed, Clara and Thomas remained, studying the building plans in the fading light. The trading post would rise again, stronger than before, like the relationship they were carefully reconstructing, not a return to what was, but something new built upon the enduring foundation that had survived separation. Via and the passage of years, home, Clara said softly, testing the word that had held such solitary meaning for so long. Thomas's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her closer. Home, he agreed. Around them, the land stretched toward distant mountains, unchanged despite the human dramas that had played across its surface. The land endured, and now, finally, so would they. Autumn painted the Arizona territory in unexpected hues, amber grasses, golden cottonwoods along the creek, and the deep blue of a sky unmarred by summer's haze. The new trading post gleamed in the October sunshine, its freshly painted sign proclaiming Bennett and Apache Trading Company. Inside, Clara adjusted the collar of her wedding dress, a modest creation of cream-colored silk with delicate lace her mother had preserved from her own wedding day. Sarah fussed around her, arranging the small wildflower bouquet Running Wolf's granddaughter had gathered at dawn. Something's still missing, Sarah muttered, stepping back to assess her handiwork. Nothing's missing, Clara assured her, feeling a sense of completeness that had eluded her for 12 long years. Through the window, she could see guests gathering in the courtyard between the trading post and their new home, a space designed specifically for community gatherings. Judge Wilson would officiate, his legal authority complemented by Running Wolf's spiritual guidance in a ceremony that honored both their traditions. The territorial governor had even sent a representative, acknowledging Thomas's appointment and their union with official recognition. A knock at the door announced Deputy Jackson, now officially acting marshal following his promotion. "It's time," he said, offering his arm. "Thomas is waiting. Looks nearly as nervous as he did facing down Hollister." Clara laughed, the sound coming easily these days. "He's faced worse than marrying me." "I wouldn't be so certain," Jackson replied with a wink. They stepped into the courtyard, where benches arranged in a semicircle held nearly everyone from town, along with members from Running Wolf's tribe. The communities had drawn closer in the months since Blackwood's defeat, finding common purpose in rebuilding what corruption had nearly destroyed. At the center stood Thomas, his formal black suit a striking contrast to his usual practical attire. His hair was pulled back in the traditional Apache style, acknowledging his heritage on this significant day. When he saw Clara, his expression transformed, with such naked adoration that she nearly stumbled. The ceremony blended elements from both cultures, Judge Wilson reading the traditional vows while Running Wolf conducted a blessing in his native tongue. When Thomas placed her mother's ring, now cleaned and polished on her finger, Clara felt the weight of history and promise in equal measure. "By the authority vested in me by the Arizona Territory," Judge Wilson concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The celebration continued into evening, lanterns illuminating the courtyard as music and laughter filled the autumn air. Clara found a moment of quiet on the porch of their new home, watching their friends and neighbors dance beneath the stars. Thomas joined her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "Having second thoughts," he teased gently. "Only about letting Mr. Green attempt that jig at his age," she replied, accepting the glass. "He'll regret it tomorrow," Thomas chuckled, settling beside her on the bench. From his pocket, he withdrew a folded document, their marriage certificate, officially recorded and bearing the territorial seal. "Official at last," he remarked, smoothing the parchment carefully. "After all this time." Clara traced the elegant script of their names. "I keep thinking about that young woman in the photograph, the one who waited by the window for weeks after you left. If someone had told her this day would come, she wouldn't have believed it," Thomas finished. "Any more than I would have during those years in prison." They sat in comfortable silence, the document between them representing not just their union, but the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. "I received a letter from the governor yesterday," Thomas mentioned. "The investigation into Blackwood's operations has uncovered similar schemes in 3 other territories. His conviction is all but certain. Justice finally served," Clara murmured. "Speaking of justice," Thomas continued, "the land rights settlement for Running Wolf's people was approved. Their hunting grounds are legally protected now." Clara smiled, satisfaction warming her more than the champagne. "Good. They've been stewards of this land far longer than any of us." From the courtyard, Sarah called for them to rejoin the celebration. The wedding cake, her special recipe, was ready for cutting. "Duty calls, Mrs. Apache," Thomas said, offering his hand. Clara accepted it, still adjusting to her new name. "Mrs. Bennet Apache," she corrected with mock severity. "I didn't build a trading empire just to surrender my name entirely." His laugh was rich and uninhibited, a sound she was still getting accustomed to after the cautious, vigilant man who had returned to her life less than a year ago. As they rejoined their guests, Clara caught sight of Morning Star watching them with knowing eyes. The elderly Apache woman nodded once, as if confirming a prophecy fulfilled. Later, as twilight deepened into night and the celebration continued around them, Thomas led Clara in a dance beneath the stars. 12 years, he murmured against her hair. "Worth the wait." Clara leaned into his embrace, the solid reality of him still sometimes surprising after so many years of absence. "Even with everything we lost, we found something greater," he replied simply. Over his shoulder, Clara could see their new home and business, symbols of a future built from the ashes of the past. Through the window of what would become their family parlor, a lamp burned warm and inviting. No longer a solitary light in a widow's window, but the heart of a home created together. "Yes," she agreed softly. "We did," as the moon rose over the Arizona desert, casting silver light across the land that had witnessed their separation and reunion. Clara and Thomas continued their dance, moving together now in the rhythm they had nearly lost forever, but somehow, against all odds, had found again, full circle at last.